So, with Extreme Valtan coming to the Western release of Lost Ark on the 7th of February, I thought it would be a good idea to make a guide for those who've never done Inferno Valtan and want to know the differences mainly between your Garden Variety Hard Mode Valtan and what you can expect in Extreme Valtan, because Extreme Valtan is identical to Inferno Valtan in terms of mechanics, but different in the sense that it still uses your character's gear, your stats, everything that you have. It's not equalized content like Inferno Valtan, but all the patterns and mechanics are the same as Inferno Valtan, so there will be some differences that you'll want to be aware of going into this if you've never tried Inferno. This guide assumes that you already have an understanding, or at least a basic understanding, of the mechanics in Hard Mode Valtan, so the focus is on what's new in Extreme, and we'll be going over a lot of the patterns that already exist in Hard Mode Valtan, but that you probably don't pay much attention to because they don't do much to you, but in Extreme Valtan they will actually have an impact and cause you to wipe if you don't execute them properly. So we'll go over Gate 1 first, and then Gate 2. So the biggest difference, and this applies to both gates, is the amount of damage that you take. Compared to Hard Valtan, everything is going to hit much harder. All of the patterns, any mechanic that does damage, it's all going to be much more punishing. Other than that, the amount of damage you do is very important in the sense that the DPS check is stricter. The amount of damage you need to deal to the boss before he goes berserk is stricter than your hard mode version. However, in the case of Valtan, the DPS check for Inferno is not actually very tight at all. It's actually extremely lenient compared to something like Inferno Kakal Seidon, so that's much less of an issue, but it still is a consideration. One thing to remember is also, because Extreme Valtan is not equalized content, you can get an edge over it in terms of your item level, your weapon quality, your armor quality, elixirs, all these sorts of things. However, I would still say that you should expect to take a lot of damage from patterns if you're around the item level for the content. Even if you're maybe 10 item levels above it, it's probably still going to hit extremely hard. This, I say, applies to both the 1580 and the 1620 version of Extreme Valtan. So those are literally the two biggest differences: the amount of damage you take and the amount of damage you deal. So let's start by looking at the battle items that you would be taking into Gate 1. So obviously purple HP potions, whether you're a DPS or a support. Sacred Charms, whether you're a DPS or a support. These two are the most important. Beyond that, you have a bit of choice of what you can take. You can take Panacea, depending on your party composition, if you're lacking cleanses, or if you are using a skill of a Purify rune on a long cooldown and you want to have a backup method to cleanse yourself. If you're okay with cleanses, then you can take Atropine for DPS or Stimulant for support to increase the damage per second for the raid. And then your last option, generally you can just take a Dark Grenade to help deal damage, but it's not strictly necessary. Or you could take a Wall Run Grenade for the major mechanic stagger checks, but again, those stagger checks are easy, so they're not strictly necessary either. So I'll explain why the cleansing and the Panacea Sacred Charm situation is extremely important, and this has to do with the bleed stacks of the Red Wolf in Gate 1. So this is extremely important. You really need to pay attention to these bleed stacks. So Red Wolf, almost every single one of his attacks, if he hits you, he will give you a stack that does bleeding damage over time to you. If you reach 3 stacks, you will spawn a line that travels across the map, and this line does damage to any raid member that it connects with. Now, in Hard Valtan, you see everyone spawn these lines everywhere all the time, and everyone's just tanking them. In Extreme Valtan, if you tank 2 or 3 lines at the same time, you are going to die. So I've seen gunslingers get nearly one-shotted by one line in Inferno, but so it's very important to manage your bleed stacks and watch out for the bleed stacks of your party members to avoid this happening. So now you're in a situation where you'll actually be forced to dodge the Red Wolf's attack patterns, not just because of the damage they deal, but because of the bleed stack that they put on you. Panacea is there in the event that you have 2 bleed stacks and you have no quick method to cleanse them, and you think you might risk getting a 3rd one, then you can use Panacea to remove the stacks from yourself. Sacred Charm is there to remove the stacks from your teammates near you. If you look at your party list, you can see the debuffs your teammates have, and you can see if they have bleed stacks, Sacred Charm can remove them. However, you might not want to use all your Sacred Charms or Panaceas during the Red Wolf phase, because later in the fight, the Blue Wolf and Purple Wolf have the blue freeze projectiles, and Panacea and Panacea won't help you there, but Sacred Charm will allow you to free your teammates there. So saving some Sacred Charms for that part of the fight might help in the event that the teammate gets frozen in a bad situation, but we'll explain that when we get there. So I'll point out some patterns for the Red Wolf that you probably just face tank on hard mode, but now you'll have to watch out in Inferno, because they give bleed stacks and do a lot of damage. Just a quick note regarding the cleansing, I would highly suggest putting a Purify rune on one of your skills, preferably one with a low cooldown, because that can be a very easy way to just remove a bleed stack that you have. For Gate 2 as well, Purify rune would help, but it's not as necessary as Gate 1, and I'll explain more about it when we get to the Gate 2 section. Also, another note before I go over the deadly patterns of a Red Wolf. The major mechanics of Gate 1 are the same as Hard Valtan, and there aren't a lot. It is your 30 HP bar stagger check and your 15 HP bar stagger check. That's it. They work the same way as always. You collect the orbs, you do the stagger. So there's nothing different there. So the difference in Gate 1 for Extreme is just the patterns and the bleed stacks and dealing with the projectiles that the Blue and Purple Wolf shoot from their hands, which I'll cover later. So the first pattern I'd like you to watch out for is this one. He makes telegraphed red lines on the ground that are easy to dodge. But after this you need to watch out, because he's gonna do a backflip which does damage if it hits you, followed by 3 red lines that are in line with his front and back attack hitbox. It'll be 1 red line in line with him, and then 2 more that expand outwards after that. Getting hit by any part of this pattern gives you a bleed stack, and it does a lot of damage. So the moment you see the red line telegraphs, you immediately know that he's going to do this pattern, so you can prepare yourself to dodge the entire pattern. The next Red Wolf pattern that you really need to be careful of is when he creates a cone telegraph in front of him. He'll begin to do repeated slashes and give bleed stacks with his slashes. After those, he'll do a final slash attack that does even more damage. This cone attack is extremely deadly, nobody will survive tanking this, so you must make sure you dodge it. You can get hit by the initial attacks, although you should try not to. You will still have time to spacebar out or move out, and you should do so, otherwise you'll die. You'll get bleed stacks if you get hit by some of the initial attacks, but you can at least still dodge it even if you were hit by the starting attacks. Then lastly, of course I'm not covering every single pattern, like I said, this assumes you have a basic knowledge. I'm just covering 3 patterns of Red Wolf that I think should be paid attention to more closely to avoid the bleed stack situation, and because of the damage you'll be taking from them now on Extreme Valtan. So the last of the 3 patterns that I want you to look at carefully is when he teleports behind a random player. Now, he's gonna first look at the player that he's aggro to, then he'll teleport to that player, then he will do a slash attack that gives a bleed stack, followed by a 360 spin that gives bleed stacks to anybody that is standing around him. So you need to be aware that he's going to do a 360 spin after the initial slash, because if you go into DPS after the slash and get hit by the spin, you'll take damage and receive a bleed stack. So at this point you might be thinking, okay, How do we use, or which sidereals do we use in this gate? Well, it's pretty simple. We just use firing. We use them for the damage, and because one wolf invades and the wolves share an HP pool, if you manage to hit both wolves with fire rain, you're actually doubling the damage that the fire rain does, because he's hitting the same HP pool twice. So the idea behind using fire rain in this raid is when both wolves are on the field at the same time. So in the first part of a fight, when the red wolf is the main opponent and the blue wolf is the invader, you want to, whoever has the aggro of a blue wolf should try and drag him away from the red wolf, and the person with the red wolf's aggro should try and keep him stationary and stay close to him so that he doesn't do the tornado pattern, since he's more likely to do the tornado pattern if you move far away from him with his aggro. So it's important to remember that the blue wolf is scripted to do a dash attack towards his aggro target if the target moves far away. So that's why it's more reliable for the person with blue aggro to move a wolf than it is for the person with red aggro. So the person with blue aggro will just move a wolf away, and then you need to line them up. So the party leader needs to stand behind either of the two wolves, a bit of a distance, and then he can cast fire in, and if the wolves are lined up, fire in will hit both of them and do double damage essentially. It's not the end of the world if you miss one of the wolves and only hit one of them with fire in, it's still fine, but ideally you want double damage from the fire in. There's no way cheese in Extreme, so way is not an option. You have to do the stagger mechanics properly. So the only sidereal option we are left with is fire in to give that damage boost. As I mentioned earlier, for the major HP bar stagger checks at 30 HP bars and 15 HP bars, they're the same as hard mode, so there's nothing special here in Extreme. You'll execute them as you execute them normally. There is actually one small detail for the 15 HP bar stagger check, but I'll explain when we get to that point. So now the next important thing to look at is the blue wolf and his gimmicks, and his main gimmick is just the projectiles on his hand that he shoots out. So the green projectiles are easy to deal with. You see his hand glowing green, you know he's going to shoot out a green projectile at each player. So the best way to deal with this is for the party leader to ping a location for everyone to stand when you see his arm glow green, generally at melee range back attack of the boss, and everyone will stack there, and then the boss will throw a green projectile at every player. But because you're stacked, say you're safe inside that area, because the green projectile creates a inside safe small circle and then an outside damage ring that expands outwards. If the party is spread out and not stacked, then you'll have to just move far away from all the green projectiles to avoid the damage. So that's not the best way to deal with it, but it can be the case that that happens sometimes. The orange projectiles that he shoots, if his hand's glowing orange, then he shoots the projectiles. You can again just ping somewhere to stack so everyone stacks, and after he shot the projectile, then everyone just runs away from the orange projectiles because they will just do an explosion that just does damage in a nearby AoE. You don't even really need to stack for this one to dodge it, but it does make it easier. But honestly, I mean, if everyone is just sort of spread out around the boss and he throws the orange projectiles, as long as you move in the general direction away from all the explosions, it'll be fine. So the real dangerous one, and the one that you'll have to actually deal with properly compared to doing hard mode Valtan, is the blue projectile, the freeze projectile, because getting hit by even one of these does a lot, or a moderate amount of damage. So if you spawn like 20 of these on the map, it's going to do a lot of damage to everybody. This causes raid wipes. It can also freeze you, and that can leave people in a bad position to get comboed by patterns from the boss afterwards. So to deal with the blue freeze projectiles, again, we'll ping a location to stand, generally close to the boss. We'll wait for him to throw the ice projectiles outwards, so that they land where everyone is stacked. Then you make some distance from where the projectile landed. This is to give you time to react, so when the projectile explodes and shoots outwards, you just spacebar into it towards it. This means that you won't get frozen, you have status ailment immunity when you're spacebarring, so you block the freeze from the projectile. You also stop the projectile from spreading into more projectiles, because it will only do that if it successfully freezes a player. If it doesn't, then it will disappear. It will damage a single player and it will disappear. So if everybody does this correctly, then you'll only at most take damage from one blue projectile, which is fine, and you'll prevent them spreading across the map. So the whole party needs to do this to stop the blue projectiles from spreading. So remember what I said about one small thing to mention about the 15 HP bar stagger check? Well, that's the fact that all those AoE explosions and the projectiles the blue wolf shoots out once you succeed the stagger check are actually going to do damage to you, so you don't really want to take that damage. So there's a method you can use to tank it in a sense. If you go all the way to the 6 o'clock cliff edge, then none of the ground explosions, the circular ones, will hit you. And if you get a support to use damage reduction on your party, then all the blue projectiles flying towards you won't do much damage to you either. So that's a generally good strategy to use here. The other thing you can do is just manually dodge all of it, and then be sure to dodge the telegraphed red line on the ground at the end of the pattern. So this pretty much wraps up Gate 1. Like I said, the major mechanics haven't really changed. It's just that you need to watch out more for the normal patterns now. So the purple wolf, the end part of the fight, is just a combination of the blue and the red wolf. He will do the hand projectiles that the blue wolf does. He will do some of the patterns that the blue wolf does, some of the patterns that the red wolf does. But he won't give bleed stacks the way the red wolf does, at least. One thing that you should be cognizant of while fighting the purple wolf is eventually, if a fight goes on long enough, he will give a debuff to 2 random players that drops a purple zone that does damage over time in a wide area, so you want to watch to see if you get this debuff and drop those zones on the outer edges of a map, because they'll do significant damage if you stand in them for too long. The other thing that you might not be aware of with the purple wolf is when he does his fear pattern, it's actually programmed to target the player that is the furthest away from him, so you can bait the fear if you so desire by moving away from him when he's going to do it. The fear is also on a sort of scripted timer. It's more or less every 50 seconds after he turns into his purple wolf form, so there's a bit of a pattern to his attacks in terms of the gravity wells that he drops, the hand projectiles, and the fear that he does. The fear's internal cooldown is 50 seconds, more or less, but yeah, you don't need to be super concerned about it. That's more for Inferno mode than extreme mode. So then the other thing to watch out for Purple Wolf is when he does the dash attack. That's when you see the blue telegraph on the ground and he dashes forward to grab players. He will do a slash attack after the dash, and he will slash more times based on the number of players he's grabbed. So generally just one slash is enough to one-shot a squishy DPS character, and if he grabs more characters then he will do more slashes. So if you get grabbed, be sure to put out a red danger ping for your teammates so they know not to stand in front of him or to his sides, otherwise they will get killed by the slash. Also, just try to dodge that, of course, in the first place, because you don't want to get grabbed there and die to the slash or potentially kill your teammates. If the pattern is correctly dodged, he won't do any slash, so you don't need to worry about the slash following the charge. If he grabs nobody, he will do no slash.